Are you like me? When you hear Texas governor running for president, you start thinking you're having a nightmare? Want somebody to wake you up? I mean, who is Rick Perry? Is he the second coming of George W. Bush? Plenty of people are comparing the two Texas governors to one another in substance and style. But Perry's trying to back away from it.
One of the quick ways to tell the difference is, you know, he's a Yale graduate. I'm a Texas A&M graduate.
Oh, I went to Texas A&M. He went to Yale. Besides that, the policy. You know, I'm not going to sit here. George Bush is not my opponent. George Bush is not. He's a former president, and we give him all the respect for that.
But it's going to be tough for Perry to distance himself from his Texas twin. Here's a picture showing them morphing together. Can you tell where one starts and the other begins? Here's Bush posing next to the plane he flew in the National Guard. And here he is again. No, wait, that's Rick Perry next to his Air Force plane. So they look alike, but how do they sound? You be the judge.
I'm a compassionate conservative, and proudly so.
I am an unapologetic social conservative.
Here's Adam Schleimer.
Try as I may, Governor, I'm not going to wait that long. Adios, mofo.
They misunderestimated the fact that we love a neighbor in need.
They had no perception of what that would look like.
Culminating in the nuclear age.
The nuclear energy folks.
So if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck, right? Maybe not. Rick Perry is no compassionate conservative like Bush said he was. This cartoon sums it up. Bush plus the Tea Party equals Perry. And this headline from The Atlantic, Perry is Bush on steroids. Now that's a scary thought. Joining me now is James Moore, former national TV correspondent and co-author of Bush's Brain. He's also author of an upcoming book, Adios, Mofo, Why Rick Perry Will Make Americans Miss George W. Bush. And Dave Mann, editor of Texas Observer, thank you both for joining me. James, you wrote today that if Perry and Bush were born into the same family, Bush would be dubbed the smart one. I must still be asleep having a nightmare.
Well, a bunch of us who've been around Rick since he got here in the mid-'80s, Al, we used to joke that when George W. left for Washington, we were going to slap a bumper sticker on the back of his car that said, "If you think I was bad, wait till you meet the guy who replaces me." Rick has taken the state government and he has kind of eviscerated it. But he is also a very instinctive politician. He took a constitutionally weak office of the governor in this state, and then he went and appointed his friends to run state agencies, so it becomes a cabinet-style government, and he becomes very strong. And when Bush was around, Bush cooperated with the Democrats. Bush, as I mentioned in that article, he sat down and talked to each one of them one-on-one, all 181 of them. Rick's not having any of that. Rick doesn't do compassionate conservatism. Rick does kick-ass conservatism. Rick demands that women get a sonogram if they're going to get an abortion, and that their doctors ask them if they want to hear the baby's heartbeat. He wants religion involved in our daily lives, his religion, and in our schools. And he's not backing off on any of this stuff.
But wasn't he a Democrat?
He was a Democrat, Al. He came to Austin as a Democrat, and then he ran into Karl Rove, and Karl Rove whispered in his ear, he said, "Look, you're a good-looking guy. You got your politics are kind of conservative. They're not really democratic. But heck, back in those days, you could take a Texas Democrat north of the Red River, and they'd be a conservative Republican. It was easy for him to make the switch. And then Karl got him money to run for a statewide office, and then he became lieutenant governor with Bush as governor, and he was on his way. And he's been tacking to the right very hard for many years, and he's way off on the edge of the right of the flat earth with his crowd that he's following now.
But a lot of our digging and a lot of what you guys have come up with shows a different picture. He says in his book this about how he hates the stimulus plan. He says we're fed up with bailout after bailout and stimulus plan after stimulus plan, each one of which tosses principle out the window along with taxpayer money. But then we look at Texas using the stimulus plan.
Right.
This is under him. $17.4 billion of federal fund. Dave, Then we see Texas using $8 billion to pay recurring state expenses. Texas Tribune. I mean, Dave, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, or he's talking out of his mouth while he's putting stimulus money in his state-run pockets. This is the height of hypocrisy.
Yeah, Rick Perry doesn't like federal money until he actually needs it. As you mentioned, in 2009, Texas would not have been able to balance its budget without federal stimulus money. Just in 2009 alone, we took $12 billion in federal money to balance our budget, and that's $12 billion out of the $17 billion you're talking about. So, yeah, he was talking about how terrible the stimulus was. He was talking about how we don't want federal money. We don't need federal money in Texas. He turned down unemployment funds.
In 2009, I was just showing the graph, he took $3.3 billion just to balance the budget that year in 2009.
Right, and so we had a budget hole we needed to fill, and when we needed to fill it, we turned to the federal government, just like any state would. But so, when it comes to Rick Perry and federal stimulus money, the rhetoric doesn't always match the action.
Now, but Dave, didn't he want to succeed from the union? I mean, why would you want to succeed and at the same time take federal money from the national government you want to lead?
Well, he said we might have to flirt with secession. That's one of those examples where Rick Perry made what seemed like a very controversial statement, and he walked right up to the line and maybe crossed it a little bit, and seemed kind of outlandish at the time, seemed almost crazy at the time. But in retrospect, it turned out to be politically advantageous and to his political benefit to say, well, maybe we should consider secession, because this was in tax day 2009. He was forming an alliance at that point with the Tea Party. He was getting out front of what turned out to be a very powerful political movement in 2009.
The same year he took $3.3 billion in stimulus money to balance the budget of the state. James, Karl Rove has been somewhat publicly negative toward Mr. Perry. Can Karl Rove bring Governor Perry down?
He's going to try. He's not on the team, and he thinks Perry's gone too far to the right. But, they sort of...
Wait a minute. Karl Rove thinks that Rick Perry has gone too far to the right.
Yep. Because, look, if you say the things that Rick Perry is saying in the primary process and you get far enough out to the right, it makes it very difficult for the mainstream to embrace you. And that's what Karl's suggesting. But it's more than that. I mean, their love affair ended back in the early 90s when there was an opening in a U.S. Senate seat here.
So this
and Rick
is personal. What happened?
Well, Rick wanted that Senate seat, and Karl gave it to Kay Bailey Hutchison, and Rick ended up running for lieutenant governor. And then Rick was in a tough race against John Sharp, and Rick wanted to go negative, but Karl wouldn't let him because he wanted to run up the numbers to make Bush look presidential. And so there have been those problems. And then what happened, the last thing that happened was Karl ran Kay Bailey Hutchison's race against Rick Perry to unseat him in the GOP primary. So there's no love lost there, and Karl likes to play on the big field. And if Rick succeeds, Karl is left off on the margins being a broadcaster for the broadcasting arm of the Republican Party.
So it's a matter of the student taking over and going beyond the teacher and kind of overshadowing the teacher. That never sits too well.
No, I don't think it does, and I want to add one more thing to what Dave was saying, and you had commented about the stimulus package. Bear in mind that it is President Obama and the stimulus money that has made it possible for Rick Perry to balance the budget in the state of Texas and to avoid raising taxes. If it weren't without this stimulus money, there's no way that he would have been able to make up that deficit without a tax increase.
Wait a minute.
He's complained about the stimulus money.
You're telling me that if President Obama had not done the stimulus package, that Rick Perry, who's bragging about his executive management skills in Texas, would not have been able to balance the budget?
That's exactly what I'm telling you.
Shut your mouth, James. We can't tell the people that.
It took the president's stimulus package to balance the budget so Rick could go out and campaign and say, I balanced a $27 billion budget without taxes.
I'm going to Texas and tell you to shut your mouth again. James
Come
Moore
on down.
And Dave May, man, thank you for your time this evening.